Hey guys, this is Mark. In this lecture, I will talk about the process of saving new objects in a database. The process is very common in most of the applications when someone creates a new order, submits a new blog post, when someone submits a comment. All those entities are objects, and the functionality of saving something in a database exists pretty much in every single application. In Codeless, creating a new object in a database really takes just one Codeless block. And I put together an application that demonstrates how to use that block. It is a little bit more advanced because in addition to saving an object, it also creates a relationship with another secondary object. I made it more complex because creating new objects is cool and very common, but in real applications, there will be relationships. So I wanted you to see what it really takes to create a relationship between two different objects. Let me run this application first, and then I will walk you through of the logic that it's made out of, just so you can see how easy it is. I think it is fairly easy, but you can also will be able to replicate this in your application. Let's go ahead and run this app. So this application is very straightforward, and it really is a simplified app of just entering new address. So here in the street address, let's just enter 123 Main Street. And in the neighborhood, which is a select component, the drop down, there are 5 New York boroughs. So this is kind of a form to enter a New York address. So let's say this Main Street is going to be in Manhattan. Click Add Address, and we get a notification that address has been created. So very super simple workflow. But by looking at it, you will see that we have a couple of things going on. Well, first of all, the data in the select component actually comes from the database. So there is a use case of retrieving data from the database and populating a drop-down list. And the way it is implemented, as you will see, that these New York boroughs are sitting in a separate data table. Then we will be creating a new address, and you will see in the database that this 123 Main Street is already in the database. In fact, let's switch to the back end and take a look at the address table. In this address table, you see that there is this 123 Main Street, and there is a relationship through a column named hood to a object that is in the neighborhood table, and it is Manhattan. Exactly as what we selected here. So we selected Manhattan and we entered 123 Main Street. So clicking this Add Address button accomplished a couple of things. Number one, it created this object in the address table right here. And then it created a relationship between this object and one of the New York neighborhoods, specifically Manhattan. So those are two distinct operations that we have in our codeless logic. Once everything was successful, which means both creating the address and establishing relationship with a neighborhood, then we display the notification. So now let's take a look at the logic that it takes to implement this functionality. Number one, populating the drop-down list. So select this drop-down list and go to Properties, and in data binding we have the value logic, which is selected hood. Now this value logic is needed whenever someone selects a neighborhood. Then in page data, this selected hood property will contain the actual selected value. However, populating the drop-down list with a list of the neighborhoods goes into this options logic, and the options logic, you can see it right here. So what happens here is we load table objects from the neighborhood table. We sort them by name. And then here we use this map items in list block. And what this block does, we actually haven't reviewed it in any of other lectures yet. What this block does, it actually loops through all of the objects that are returned by this query. And for every single object returned from this query, it creates another object with two properties, value and label. And then the value property in this created object is going to be object ID from the neighborhood. And then the label is going to be the name from the neighborhood. What happens here is this map items in list will return a collection of these objects. And the reason it does that is because for the drop-down list, in order to have that list populated with all those New York neighborhoods, we need to have a collection of objects where each one has value and label properties. The value is what's going to be actually what will identify the selected item, and label is what will be displayed. I know this is completely off the track of just saving data in the database, but using the opportunity, I wanted to discuss and demonstrate this to you. So what we have here will result in the drop-down being populated. Now, street address right here. Let's take a look at the data binding. It goes right into street address property in page data. So, and the rest of the logic will be in the add address button. Let's go to that logic. And here we finally have the logic for saving data in the database. The main guy is going to be this one, save object in backendless. If you are going to be looking for this one, it is going to be under backendless in the data API. And you will see it right here, save object in backendless. Let's review its properties. The input parameters. Number one is going to be the table name, which is the table where you want to save that object, and it is address. And the second parameter is the object itself. So here, what we are doing is we're creating a new object with the property street. And the property street, that name street, comes from the actual database. Well, it doesn't really come from the database. It is declared in the database. So let's take a look at the address table. So here's the address table and switch to schema. You see that there is a property called street. And that's the one that we're passing from UI Builder, from our UI application, to the database. There is another property city. We never do anything with this. And as a result, in that object we created, city is empty. So let's go back to UI Builder. Add address and logic. So we created a new object with the property street because that's the name of the column. And the property street will contain the value that we typed in the input parameter. If you need to modify the street or add other properties, click the gear icon. And here you can just add other properties, give them the name, and then this object that will be created will have those properties. So now, save object in a database. When this block returns, it will actually return the object that is saved in the database. So this created address variable will contain the actual created address. Once the address is created and it is in the database, the next step is to link that address with that selected New York neighborhood. And that linkage happens in this add object relations block. And then what this guy does is in table address, for the created address object, so for this created object, it becomes the parent object. The relation name is hood. So this hood word right here references a column in the address. See, hood, it means that we are adding a relation to this column right here. Let's go back to our logic. So we're referencing this relation. And in that relation, we're identifying a collection of other objects that it needs to be linked with. Well, in our case, there is no collection. It is just one neighborhood. However, this block requires that children is a collection, because otherwise it would say child if it expected one. So if it says children, it requires a collection. And then in here, in this collection, once again, we're creating new object to identify the selected neighborhood. And see, this object has this object ID, which is going to be sitting in our page data for selected hood. And this selected hood is the data binding for our select, the drop-down component. Once this object relation is created, then all we do is we just turn on visibility for the status block. And the status block is this green address has been created block. I know this is a lot, but it is actually quite simple once you try it at least once. So what I recommend in order to recreate all of this is you would need to go to the backend. You will need to create table address, recreate the schema as you see here on the screen, and then to create new columns, just click new, declare the column name, select the corresponding type. Since the table address references neighborhood, it would be a good idea to create the table neighborhood first. And then in the table neighborhood, it really is just one column. Other ones are system level columns. It is name. Then in data browser, you can populate the values. Then create the table address. Declare the schema, declare the relationship column. And then this is a one-to-one relationship to the neighborhood. Once you have this in place, then if you recreate everything we have done here, specifically this is the logic for saving the object and then establishing the relationship. And for the drop down, I will bring it up one more time. The options logic looks like this. So there is quite a lot of new stuff in this lecture, specifically using map items in the list. And then of course, saving the object and establishing the relationship. And all of these concepts are extremely important, extremely useful, because you will see that you will need to be coming back to them over and over in whatever the application you're building. I hope this is all useful information and it made sense. If not, please add a comment, ask your questions. We'll be happy to clarify. Thank you for watching this video. And as always, happy codeless coding.